Hi, welcome to week one of my Waiver Wire show, brought to you by 32 and 32. Let's get working on navigating and maintaining your fantasy teams. And the first thing I want to say is week one was a little bit bizarre, and there's going to be a tendency for some folks to overreact. I've been seeing a lot of drops that I want to pounce on. And don't be the one that drops those people. Be the one that takes advantage of the people that drop those people. I'm looking at guys like Ronald Jones already being on waiver wires, Marcus Callaway, Zach Moss, Mike Gesicki, although maybe Gesicki belongs there. There were a lot of injuries in week one on top of leading up to week one. But the key ones yesterday were Raheem Mostert hurt his knee, apparently has a cracked cartilage, and is going to miss 8 weeks. So if you have Raheem Mostert, you may have to drop him. I don't know if I want to put him on my IR for 8 weeks. And speaking of IR, if you have the spots, use them. Don't save them. There's no reason to. If you have guys that you want, like Rashad Bateman is someone I was drafting instead of a kicker and then putting him on my IR and just grabbing a kicker off the waiver wire. Michael Gallup looks like he's going to miss about a month, so you're going to need a replacement for him. Jerry Jeudy looks like he's going to miss up to 2 months, 6 to 8 weeks. And Ryan Fitzpatrick may not be back, and that's unfortunate. That's a guy that just cannot catch a break. So you're going to need replacements for those guys, and you're going to need to decide if you want to keep them. Some weird scratches yesterday in the morning games. Trey Sermon was a surprise for certain. So was Zach Moss. To me, Joshua Kelly was a little bit of a surprise. But that's going to lead to me talking about somebody else on the Chargers as a prospective watch list candidate. This will be recorded weekly on Mondays, probably earlier than the Monday night game. But I'm going to tell you some key things I'm going to be looking for on tonight's game between Baltimore and the Raiders in Las Vegas. Baltimore talked about being more of a passing team this year. I don't know exactly what that means, but we'll get a chance to see if that's true tonight. With all the injuries they have in the backfield, you'd think they would be throwing more, but we'll see if they put their money where their mouth is. I'm interested to see who wins both backfields. You've gotten Baltimore. The only active guys they're going into this game with are going to be Tyson Williams, Latavius Murray, and Trenton Cannon. I think Williams will probably get most of the work. Cannon and Murray are just on the team for a few days. So I'm going to be looking for a good game out of Tyson Williams and a chance to maybe carve himself out a major role on that team. On the Raiders side, how big of a role is Kenyon Drake going to have? And, in the passing game, are Bryan Edwards, Henry Ruggs, and Hunter Renfrow going to be any kind of competition with Darren Waller for targets? So those are things I'm looking for in those games. Moving on to waivers for Wednesday, some leagues run Thursday. As far as quarterbacks go, I'm probably only going to speak to 1 or 2 guys a week. The main reason that is if you're in a 2 quarterback league, you've pretty much already got anybody with a pulse. Now, the one guy that's going to pop up this week, and if he's on your waiver wire, you're going to want to grab him, is Taylor Heineke. He's going to be the starter for the foreseeable future for the Redskins unless they bring somebody in. I guess I'm keeping an eye on Cam Newton for 2 quarterback leagues, or maybe even rostering him. I think eventually he's going to wind up playing. But in 1 quarterback leagues, there's a guy I think has potential QB1 upside, for the season. And you're probably going to hear the name Jameis Winston on most waivers shows for this week. Now, Jameis didn't throw the ball a ton this week. He only had, I think, 20 pass attempts for 148 yards, but it's hard to ignore 5 touchdowns. He was extremely efficient. He did get one break on a roughing the passer call that called back an interception. And I don't think Jameis is going to go 5-0 every week as far as touchdowns and interceptions go. But I think there's a reason to be real optimistic for this offense. And part of the reason is the defense looks so good. The Packers were a real head scratcher yesterday. I think a lot of people would love to sell their Packers. I don't recommend doing it. I think the Packers will bounce back just fine. On running backs, there's one guy I would absolutely recommend picking up, and everybody's going to tell you to pick up Elijah Mitchell. 19 carries, 104 yards, 1 touchdown. He got a chance when Raheem Mostert went down early after only 2 carries, and he pretty much grabbed the bull by the horns. Couple of things to remember, though. He did not have any targets. So the question is he going to carve out that role? Is he going to get targets going forward? The second thing to remember is this is Kyle Shanahan's team, and they're a little bit of a confusing team, to be kind. They've still got JaMychal Hasty. I don't think Trey Sermon's going to be a healthy scratch in week 2. Jeff Wilson's eventually going to come back, maybe week 6, week 8, sometime around there. He's going to have a role, and Mostert will be back in a couple of months. I'm not waiting for those guys, but I'm certainly keeping an eye on them. So those are things to remember, but I'm definitely putting in a waiver claim on Mitchell. He's the one running back that I absolutely want this week in most leagues. I'm not going to say, I'm in a league where Jamal Williams is on waivers. So if Jamal Williams is on waivers, I'm grabbing him. I don't need to tell you that. I'm more looking to give you a little bit more of a deep dive. Most leagues are 12-team leagues. Most teams are PPR leagues. So that's kind of the niche I'm trying to carve out here. The second running back is more of a watch list guy, but it's Tony Jones in New Orleans. He had 11 carries this week for 50 yards. He had a target. Now, the thing to remember there is that was a very positive game script. So New Orleans ran the ball quite a bit more than they threw it. So the question is Tony Jones going to have the Latavius Murray role? And the answer for me is I'm going to take a look, and I'm going to certainly keep my eye on the situation. The third guy I want to mention had a big role yesterday, but I'm not as bullish on him, and that's Mark Ingram of the Texans. He had 26 carries, 85 yards, a touchdown, even had a target. The thing to remember about that is a lot of his carries came when the game was already over. And the fact that the game was over in the Texans' favor fairly early was a shocker, to say the least. The thing with Ingram is he going to have that type of a role every week? I probably doubt it. Philip Lindsay still played. David Johnson still played. All 3 of those guys scored touchdowns yesterday. So if the Texans are competitive, then Ingram's worth a watch. And I'm not going to tell you not to add him. I mean, the fact of the matter is if he winds up getting 20 or more carries a week, he's absolutely an ad. But I have my doubts. Now, a couple of other guys in PPR leagues, they're a little bit deeper dive, but I think are worth worth a mention as watches. Kenneth Gainwell for Philadelphia Eagles. He looks like he's going to be the running back 2 in Philly. And I'd love to see him have a decent role so that Miles Sanders can stay on the field. And I'm gonna roll the dice. I'm gonna at least put him. It doesn't cost you anything to have anybody on your watch list. So definitely put him on your watch list. Another guy that is always underappreciated and is available in way more leagues than he should be, even PPR leagues, is James White. James White's a terrific pass catching back. And even though it looks like Damian Harris is probably going to get the lion's share of that backfield, I still like James White as a PPR flex possibility. So yeah, I'm watching him. A name I'm a little surprised I'm mentioning, and it's a guy that's constantly on watch lists, is Cordell Patterson. He looks like actually he may be the number 2 guy in Atlanta, and he may have a role, and especially on leagues that give return points. I'm watching Cordell Patterson. He had 9 touches yesterday, and that's not nothing. It's not something I'm running out to grab, but watch lists, again, they don't cost anything. You can put guys on your watch list, take them off all the time. The last guy is more of a non-PPR consideration, and that's Larry Roundtree of the Chargers. He had 8 carries yesterday, which is decent, and he looks like he might be the ground and pound guy. I mean, Justin Jackson only had a couple of touches. Like I said earlier, Joshua Kelly was a scratch. So if Roundtree is the change of pace back for Austin Eckler, he's worth consideration. He's worth a watch. Now, moving over to wide receivers, there's 2 guys that I'm very interested in. First one is not available in many of my leagues, but I looked on Yahoo, and he's available in over 60% of leagues. And that's Sterling Shepard. And Sterling Shepard should be much more highly rostered. Yesterday, he had 9 targets, 7 receptions, 113 yards, and a touchdown. And if I've got somebody that's getting that kind of production, and I don't see a reason why he cannot continue along those lines, then he's a must-add to me, especially in PPR. The second guy is a guy that I tried as hard as I could not to even mention, but I couldn't ignore him. He jumped off the stat sheet. And that's KJ Osborne in Minnesota. And I'm pretty sure he wasn't even drafted in the deepest leagues I'm in. But KJ Osborne had 9 targets, had 7 receptions for 76 yards in a game that admittedly the Vikings threw 50 times. But he looks like a viable third receiver there. I don't really see much competition right now. I don't think Dede Westbrook is that guy. So I'm absolutely looking to add him. They've certainly got a favorable passing outlook the next 4 weeks. They've got Arizona, they've got Seattle, they've got Cleveland, and they've got Detroit. Yeah, that's a guy I'm looking to add. It's spec, but if you get that kind of production on a week-to-week basis, you've got at least a flex. Now, looking at some of the guys that got injured, first for the Cowboys, Michael Gallup is going to be out for a few weeks. So a guy I'm going to be keeping my eye on at least is Cedric Wilson. He's certainly familiar with the team. He's been there 3 years. He's the likely replacement. Not seeing much of anything else for Gallup. So that makes him a wide receiver team on a high-powered offense. Now, the flip side of the coin is he's never had a big role when he's been on the team. So that's why I have him more as a watch than an ad. He's a guy to keep an eye on. Next, in Denver, and the only reason I don't rate this higher is because I can't make up my mind between KJ Hamler and Tim Patrick. It's possible both of these guys may have a role. They may both be relevant. I mean, the Broncos look fine with Teddy Bridgewater under center, which is a bit of a surprise. But, they look like they're going to have a relevant passing offense. The problem is they may cancel each other out. And the thing to remember is that Courtland Sutton was taken out of that game. I've got to think he saw a lot of James Bradbury in that game, and that's probably why. So Sutton's going to command more than 3 targets and 1 reception most weeks. But, I'm still keeping my eyes on Hamler and Patrick to see if one of them emerge. Now, I'm going to go a little bit deeper for these next few names. The first one is probably a guy most people just are not ready to trust anymore. First guy is Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And, you look at the stat sheet and have 3 catches for, I believe, 18 yards, which isn't much. But he also had 7 targets. And I've been hearing a lot of good things from insiders from the Packers. And the fact of the matter is nobody did anything in that offense yesterday. 7 targets was as many as Devontae Adams had. So if MVS is going to be commanding 7 targets a game, I'm definitely going to keep my eye on him. I have him on the end of some of my benches. The next guy is a guy that fell out of favor after last season, and that's Jalen Reagor of the Eagles. But he hauled in all 6 of his targets yesterday for 49 yards and a touchdown. And he's absolutely worth a look to see if he can build on that. I was really pleased with how Jalen Hurts looked yesterday. Now, it was against the Falcons, so it's hard to read too much into that. But, this is guys I'm looking at as possible bye-week filler. Maybe they pop. They're specs. So, it's a watch list. So Reagor certainly belongs on watch lists. As far as Detroit goes, they had a very high-scoring game, and I think they're probably going to be coming from behind quite a bit. Now, yesterday, Hawkinson, DeAndre Swift, and Jamal Williams combined for 30 targets. The next closest player is the guy I'm going to mention right now is Quintez Cephas. It's a guy that a lot of people spec could be a guy. He's worth a watch. He had 7 targets. He did only have 3 catches for 12 yards and a touchdown, but he had the most targets of any of their wide receivers. So Terrell Williams just went down with a concussion. Don't know if he's going to play next week. And Cephas is a guy I'm going to put on my watch list to see if he can carve out a role. As far as the Giants go, they look like they're probably going to have to pass a lot this year. And I mentioned Sterling Shepard earlier, and another guy that's on a lot of waiver wires that had 7 targets was Darius Slayton, and he turned those 7 targets into 3 catches for 65 yards. He's definitely worth a watch. Zach Pascal from Indianapolis had 5 targets, 4 catches, 2 touchdowns, which it's not a lot. So I'm not rating him real high, but I'm definitely keeping an eye on him to see if he can, expand his role and continue a red zone presence. And the last guy is a guy that a lot of people pop up and down on, and I'm not real high on him. I never really have been, but you can't go. I'd be remiss without mentioning Christian Kirk from Arizona. He had 5 catches for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns yesterday. Now, granted, those 2 touchdowns came at the end of the game when Arizona had pretty much had already put the game away, but they were still scoring points. But Kirk is definitely worth a watch. But for me, I also saw A.J. Green get 6 targets, although they were inefficient. I think Rondale Moore's probably going to be a guy I'm going to watch more than Christian Kirk. I think he's exciting. I've got him on plenty of my benches in hopes of better things. Now, moving on to tight ends. Tight ends, I'm not going to talk about guys like Gesicki. I'm not even sure I want Gesicki. I'm going to talk about guys. I'm going to go a little bit deeper, and I'm going to give you a couple of guys that are absolutely on my watch list. And the first one is Jared Cook of the Chargers. Uh, 8 targets for a tight end isn't nothing. He had 8 targets yesterday, 5 catches, 56 yards. He's always a red zone favorite. Herbert only threw 1 touchdown yesterday, so there wasn't a lot to go around there. I was really, really happy with how Mike Williams looked, but I think Cook's going to have a good role on that team. So, Cook's a guy I'm looking to add if I'm desperate for points, if I kind of punted the position. Second name that looked good, and I think could also expand his role, is Cole Kmet of the Bears. If he's not owned, and he's a guy to consider. He had 7 targets yesterday. He had 5 receptions for 42 yards. Jimmy Graham looks like he's still going to be a red zone presence on that team, but I'm not that worried about Jimmy Graham. I think Cole Kmet's star is rising, and he's definitely somebody I'm keeping an eye on. The next guy is purely a red zone threat to me, but you got to take him seriously because he looked great in the red zone. Jameis Winston looked like he really trusted him. And the first question you got to ask about Juwan Johnson, is he even eligible at tight end at this point? I know in some leagues he's still only a wide receiver, but I believe Yahoo's already made him a tight end. And he only had 3 targets and 3 catches and 21 yards, but 2 touchdowns. And Jameis was looking for him in the red zone. I still like Troutman better on that team, but it doesn't take a lot to be a tight end 1 in fantasy. If you score touchdowns, you're going to be on the list. Next, I'm going to look at both of the Cowboys tight ends, Dalton Schultz and Blake Jarwin. Schultz kind of took the lead this past Thursday, but Jarwin's still kind of working back from an injury, so I'm going to keep an eye on both of them to see, just a great passing offense, and, everybody there is a weapon. A couple of guys that I'm deep diving on are Farrell Brown of the Texans, who had 5 targets and 4 receptions for 62 yards. 10 points isn't chopped liver in PPR for a tight end. And Farrell Brown could possibly be a favorite of Tyrod Taylor. I was surprised that Jordan Akins only had 2 targets. And, if Farrell Brown's going to carve himself out a role, he belongs on watch lists. And the last guy is on a team that could probably maybe shatter the record for pass attempts, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. And James O'Shaughnessy had 8 targets yesterday and 6 receptions for 48 yards. And he's not unfamiliar with the end zone. So he's a guy I'm definitely going to keep an eye on as far as tight ends go. Now, moving on to kickers, I'm not going to give a lot of kickers. You either have a guy or you don't. I mean, if you have a Bucker or a Tucker or a Koo, you're hanging on to those guys, and those are the guys you're going to be using. But if you're streaming the position, I'm going to give you a couple of names. One may not be widely available, but that's Matt Prater. I would consider rostering him for the season. Arizona looks like they're going to be a lot of fun to watch, and they're going to score a ton of points. And they're going to be playing Minnesota this week. So that's a game that has a high over-under and a decent implied point total for the Cardinals. And that's always something, if I'm streaming kickers, that's something I'm looking at. I follow the money. And, for kickers, it's going to be, I'm looking for teams that are going to score a bunch of points. And the second guy is going to be Tristan Vizcaino of the Chargers, who played Dallas this week. And that game has a very high implied point total for both teams. It's a small over-under. Chargers, I believe, are favored by 2.5 points. So that's pretty much kickers. Now I'm going to give you a few defensive names, some that may be available, some may not. The first 2 are going to be Cleveland, who's playing Houston, and Denver, who are playing Jacksonville. I would consider rostering those teams if they're available and hanging on to them. I'm not going to be real thrilled when Denver plays Kansas City. But Denver looked very good on defense yesterday, and Bradley Chubb was out. I mean, they've got upside. Cleveland played Kansas City. You know, there's no winning that if you're a defense. But they're playing Houston this week, and Denver's playing Jacksonville. Those are probably the matchups of the week. Low implied point totals for the opponents. And if those teams are available, I'm looking at. Now, a little bit more of a deep dive for the next three. I think the Giants versus the football team in Washington is going to be a very low-scoring game. The Giants' defense actually didn't look terrible yesterday, and the Washington offense didn't look very good. I'd love to have either of those defense, but Washington's defense is pretty much widely owned. The next team is probably a little bit of a surprise, and it's the Bengals against the Bears. If Andy Dalton's starting that game, I don't hate Andy Dalton, but I'm not real crazy about their line. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of points for the Bears in that game. I don't think it's going to be a runaway, but I think there's going to be opportunities for the Bengals. And the last defense I want to look at is the Jets versus New England. Now, I'd rather have New England, but that's pretty low scoring potentially in that game. I mean, the Patriots only put up 16 on the Dolphins, and the Jets actually did a pretty good job on defense in Carolina. So that is pretty much all the free agents we're going to look at this week. A couple of things I want to say. If you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter. It's a great resource for news, information about the NFL. I'll give you some widely followed names from ESPN. Adam Schefter, Field Yates, Stephania Bell, they're all top-notch. Also, from NFL Network, Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero. I follow them constantly. I have notifications turned on for all of them. I want to give a couple of recommended follows. The people that are bringing me to you, 32 in 32 Fantasy Football at 32 in 32FF. A lot of good information, a lot of good articles, a lot of good shows, and I'll be one of them. And a couple things I want to say. Don't get too caught up in work. Don't get too caught up in football. Make time to enjoy your life. If you follow people and interact with them, be kind and respectful. You'll be amazed how far that'll take you. It's one of the reasons I'm on this show doing this for you. And enjoy the football game tonight, and I'll see you next Tuesday.